Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's video, which features the contents of this box from a viewer named Paul who lives in Connecticut. So it's come quite a ways to the old workshop. So let's get that box open and get started. You know, in the past few videos, I've asked people to improve their packing on the amps that they ship. And boy, some people definitely took that to heart. Look at these big foam pads here that are protecting whatever is in the bottom here of the box. Let's get them out of the way and see what lurks below. Well, as Wonder Woman used to say, merciful Minerva. What a beautiful chassis. I have no idea what it goes to yet, but I'll tell you what, it's as nice and clean as any I've ever seen. I'm assuming the tubes are in here. This is probably the cord all wrapped up. I don't see a letter of any sort, so I might have to go in and communicate with the owner to see what sort of things have been bothering him about this chassis. Well, as my old boss at the Daily Planet, Perry White, used to say, great Caesar's ghost. It's a Brownface Deluxe. Okay, how many of these have you ever seen? It's the first one I've ever worked on, and good grief, the condition. Absolutely flawless. It does look like it's been worked on. These are replacements, and they're an odd choice for cathode bypass. They look like the voltage is much higher than it needs to be. Then some work here on the negative DC bias supply with a little trimmer. These wires sure seem bright. And this almost looks like a replacement power transformer. And look at the contrast between that soldering and the original soldering. So it looks like it has been molested, but by very gentle hands. Okay, now I didn't get a note with this one, so I'm not sure what's wrong with it. Let me go in and communicate with the owner and see what it is that he wants us to check out. Okay, I'll be back in just a second. Okay, I'm back, and here's the gist of the conversation. Asking if I'll work on it. He says it has been worked on to some extent. We've seen that's definitely true. Doesn't seem like a horror show to me. Let's hope not. It's making odd noises, volume fluctuations, and oscillations. That sounds exciting. And of course, I did accept to work on it. And he acknowledges he saw the red RTV in the negative DC bias supply, knew that it had been worked on. Yes, the depth capacitor is still connected, and we will disconnect it. Want it to sound like it did when it was new. Not a stickler for vintage parts, as long as they're good quality and the values are correct. Okay, I guess that's about it. So let's start off by taking a look at the control panel, which is virtually flawless. I see a little scratch right there, so let's just throw this in the dumpster. Just a beauty. Look at that. It's just perfect. Okay, let's look at the rear control. Okay, here we go on the back control panel. The ground switch, it's a C and R. And it's still being employed in ways that make me nervous. Okay, I don't like that. Something's wrong there, and I just gag in disgust that somebody scratched into this flawless panel the letters C or G or God knows what and R. Okay, 2 amp fuse. We'll check in just a minute. Remember the 20 amp that we found just recently, but absolutely gorgeous. Fender Electric Instrument Company. The words that bring tears to our eyes. And also, you know what that is? Electrical safety. So darn important. This is a D, O, and then 4 digits serial number. We'll look that up real quick to see what date this is. Okay, now let's take a look in at the circuit. Here we see the 3-wire power cord has been installed in ways that will give me night sweats to even think about. Okay, the it's pretty much the way it was originally with a 2-wire cord, which, you know, is not good. They've got 1 wire going through the switch, 1 wire through the fuse. This is going to have to get redone, and that big, fat, sassy old def cap down there is just going to have to go find some other place to live. Now, I have no doubt that this is a replacement power transformer. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Because the original had a center tap for the 6-volt output. This one doesn't. It also has the virtual center tap with much longer leads than need be. And then, look at this. I wonder about the varying volume and oscillations when you've got a filter cap for your negative DC power supply flapping in the breeze. Okay, it's come loose completely. Also, I was going to say I can't even find the diode, but it's back there. It's a puny one. You know how we replace those with 1,000-volt replacements. Let's look down here at the pots. All look to me to be original, but I reserve the right to change that opinion. And here's something I really have never seen before. It's an extension. It's soldered on here of that copper grounding sheet that comes up sort of like I remember on the old Valco amps where they would shield the input jacks so that I guess it would cut down on the hum. That doesn't seem legit to me, but you know, like I said, I've never worked on a Brownface Deluxe, but it's weird that they only did it on that one and they didn't do it over here. Well, the doghouse cover is off. You can see that little extra thickness here of padding that was thoughtfully put in, and it's been redone, and with IC capacitors. You know how I like them all parallel and uniform. And here, ugh, a radial capacitor. Ugh, that's printed circuit board stuff. Okay, that goes against my nature. I think these have been replaced. Okay, so it's been worked on, and you know, it probably worked when they got through. And it's maybe silly and nitpicking, but there's just some detail work that I thought, you know, might have been done here. But once again, I don't want to be overly critical. Okay, the tube shields, that's great. We have the tube set over here in the box. So I think it's time to get started on this. First off, we're going to check the schematic and see if 450 volt caps are appropriate here, and replace that one right away, and then check our resistances, ESR values, things like that. Well, according to the schematic, 450 is fine on the ratings for the filter caps. Looks like the schematic calls for 16, 16, 16, 8. And we have 22, 22, 22, 10. I'm going to change this one out. I just can't stand it. I've started kind of bending these and trying to get them where they're aligned a little better. Okay, let's change that one. You know, as luck would have it, I don't have a 10 microfarad in stock, but I have a really snazzy 4500 microfarad at 50 volt that'll fit right there. Really nice. It'll require a little body work on the doghouse, but that's the price of perfection. Fortunately, I found a nice 10 microfarad cap to install here. Next, we have to check the resistors. I did check the ESR values for these 22 microfarad caps, and they're perfect. These are fairly recent, newly installed caps, so I'm going to leave them in place. Okay, we flipped it over, and I was looking at these cathode bypass caps. They're 22 at 160 volts. Okay, that's pretty close on the capacitance. It's supposed to be 25 at about 25 to 50 volts, so it's way overkill on the voltage, but they all test out okay with the ESR meter, so I'll leave them in place. But let's focus on this mess down here that's been created in our negative DC bias supply, and I honestly think this may be the source of the problems that the owner was referring. First off, let's remove all this red silicone glue here and see what we've got going on. I know they were trying to stabilize this trimmer, but I don't even know if it's installed in the right place. So let's get rid of the goop and see what the connections look like. Okay, now looking at the schematic, we can see that we have a 22K pot to ground. Now that determines the magnitude of the negative DC bias that's going up here to the grids of the power tubes. If you decrease that resistance, then you'll reduce the amount of bias voltage and increase the plate current. If you increase this, you will send more negative DC to the grids and decrease the plate current. So what they've done is, if you look in here, put a trimmer in series with the 22K resistor. You see it's on the end right there and then goes to that position where the 22K resistor should have gone. That means you can increase the resistance, but you can't decrease it. Okay, now that really doesn't give you much leeway in adjusting the bias if you can only adjust in one direction. Okay, so let's come up with something better. How about let's check the trimmer, see what its value is, and come up with a better way to have an adjustable bias control. I've got the trimmer here where it's at 0 ohms. Let me crank it up to maximum resistance. And you see it's probably a 10K trimmer pot. It goes then from 22 to 33. Now you may want to go below 22, so what if we come up with a better solution? What if instead of the 22K fixed resistor we put in an 18K? Then with the 10K pot we'll have a range of from 18 to 28, okay, which nicely brackets the fixed 22K that was already in place. We can go 4K below and 6K above. Gives us a nice range of adjustment. One other consideration is, what if the wiper in the little pot fails and you end up here with no contact? Well, then there is no bleeding of the voltage down here to ground. It all goes to the grids and effectively shuts the tubes down. So no harm can come then, even if that little potentiometer does fail. And while we're soldering here, remember that 25 at 50 microfarad cap that smooths that negative DC bias voltage? Well, we go to 100 at 160 here, which really isn't right. So let's get it out of there and put in a proper, say 25 at 50 volt filter cap. And while we're excavating in here, let's remove this puny replacement diode and put in one of our big fat juicy 5408s. Okay, sound good? You know, I really thought about using this little plastic microscopic trimmer pot, but do you want to trust your output tube bias to that? I fabricated an aluminum bracket and a real honest-to-God 10K pot here, and we're going to wire it in, and I think I'm just going to feel a whole lot more confident with this setup than with that. And while we're at it, why don't we cut down on about the 6 inches of slack here in the virtual center tap leads. Let's unsolder them, shorten them, and just make this look a little more professional. Alright, let's see how this compares to what we started with. We've got our oversized diode back here, filter cap here, which is 25 microfarad at 50 volts. We've got our combined fixed resistor and trim pot going to ground to bleed off excess negative DC bias voltage, and here is the wire that's going to be taking it up to our tube grids. Okay, so also the virtual center tap looks a little neater, and there's just not a lot of extra wire to get in trouble. Okay, so I hope you like it. Okay, now let's direct our attention to this really weird primary wiring over here. You know darn well we're going to have to bypass that grounding switch, okay, and get rid of the so-called death capacitor. So let's go ahead and rewire this to proper standards. It's all rewired. The 3-wire power cord may be European because instead of black and white it has brown and blue main wires, and then a yellow with green stripe for the ground. The brown is the hot wire. I put in a terminal strip here, brought the brown over to the furthest terminal, ran it through the on-off switch, through the fuse, and then directly into the primary of the power transformer. The blue return wire goes to this terminal and is directly connected to the other primary wire of the power transformer. And now you see that that ground switch is completely isolated from the circuit. And since I hate to see a good switch go to waste, I think I'm going to use it to make a switchable on-off negative feedback loop. I'm going to run the negative feedback through it so that you can have the NFB engaged to have good headroom and clarity, and then switch off when you want to get things kind of wild and raunchy. Okay, it just gives an added feature to the circuit. And like I said, hate to have any good parts go to waste. For those of you who would like to make your Deluxe have a switchable negative feedback loop, and you have a completely isolated ground switch, come over here to the green, blue, orange resistor. You see where it's located, just to the left of these two caps. And what we're going to do is remove where this yellow wire connects to the output jack, run it over to the switch, and then on the other side of the switch we'll run down here to where that wire is currently connected. That way you can open and close the connection of your NFB loop. And if you're a little confused because there's 3 lugs on the switch, the ones you want to use are the single lug here where there's only one on one side, and when there's 2 on the right, it's the lower one. Okay, ignore the upper one. Lower one and left lug. Okay, that ground switch is now wired as a on-off switch for the negative feedback loop. Tried to make it just as unobtrusive as I could. Right here is the wire that comes up, and it looks like it's going to the output jack, but it runs along here hidden by the chassis, goes to one end of the switch, and then the wire comes out of the other end and comes back and connects right there to where this wire was originally connected. So now our switch is on off, and I'm going to make a label for it that tells which position's on, which position's off, and saying that it is a negative feedback switch. Well, I guess that's about it on this. I've corrected everything that was visibly incorrect or questionable. Now let's flip it over and put a set of tubes in it and see if it works, and if it does, how it sounds, and if there are any problems. Okay, we've got the tube set installed. They're all Sovtek tubes from Russia, which I've had pretty good luck with, but the high point by far of the tube set is the Amprex GZ34. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, let's plug it in and set up our signal generator and shop speaker and see if the amp will amp for us. All right, power's on, tubes are in, we're plugged into the 500 cycle per second generator and the shop speaker. So let's see what kind of sounds we can get out of this jewel. Okay, here we go. Tone pot's a little noisy, gotta clean it. Jump down there to the so-called bright channel. Tone knob definitely has an effect, even on the 500 cycle tone. Looking at the schematic for the Tremolo circuit in the 6G3 Deluxe, we see that its output will modulate the voltage charge on the grids of the 6V6s, and we know that's how they are biased, so we'll be bias modulating the 6V6s to create the tremolo effect. Also, looking at how the foot switch works, the pedal to ground it is to shut off the tremolo, and to unground it is to allow it to work, which is just the opposite of most Fender tremolos. So we do not need a foot switch or any kind of shorting back there on that RCA plug. And finally, since it's the output tubes that are being modulated by the tremolo, it doesn't matter which input we plug into, both of them have the same tremolo effect. So let's see if it works. We'll get our tone up here to a reasonable level. Let's turn on our intensity to 5 out of 10, and you hear it quite nicely. That's full speed. That's as slow as it goes. Let's briefly discuss what we've heard. It seems like slow is not slow enough. I think we're going to have to slow the tremolo down. I think the intensity is just fine. And without any sort of input tone, let's see if we have any thumping. Volume's way up. No thumping at all. So it's a dead quiet tremolo that's too fast. Also, it should be noted that there is absolutely no 60 cycle or power hum of any sort from this. It is totally silent. I couldn't even tell it was on, other than that little... You know, and I was so carried away with the tremolo investigation that I forgot about biasing these output tubes. They're electro-harmonics from Russia, a 6V6EH. They seem hot to me. So I've got my probes in place. Let's plug in the tubes and check the tube bias. I think it's going to be too hot. Okay, tubes are on. Remember the GZ34 is a slow startup rectifier. So it's going to have a much more gentle startup than it would with, say, a 5Y3 or a 5U4. And the tremolo is at work here. See how voltages are jumping around in current? Let me unplug the tremolo oscillator and see if we can't calm it down. Well, as luck would have it, if I pull the triode that's in the oscillation loop, I'll also be pulling the second preamp stage. So we're just going to have to live with the tremolo turned way down and a little bit of bouncing back and forth here on our values, which are way too high. Look right here, 40 milliamps at 335 volts. Okay, that's kind of low and that's way too high. Do the math. We're at like 13.2 on our plate dissipation, which means I'm going to turn it off right now. Okay, 13.2, and we should be at 70% of 12. We should be down around 8.4 watts. So this thing is just frying its output tubes. You know, I could tell, I could almost feel the heat from like a foot away, and that's crazy. So while we're in there slowing down the tremolo, we're going to reduce this plate dissipation quite a bit by getting the current way down, and that's going to bring the plate voltage up to a more sort of typical value for Fender amps. Okay, because of the extremely hot bias of these output tubes, I think we better get them down under control before we work on the tremolo, just to avoid any further harm to them, okay, by the excess current flow. Now, I've installed the variable bias control, so let's go ahead and start it up with this set at the coldest possible position for bias, which will be the highest resistance to ground. And then we'll see if that'll work, or if not, we'll bring it down to a proper level. And if the needed bias voltage is beyond the scope of this pot, we'll install a higher value one. I've cranked the pot to maximum resistance to ground, which when combined with the 18K fixed resistor gives us a total of 28.1 thousand ohms to ground. Now, if you recall, the schematic felt that 22,000 was adequate. So we should be cold now, okay? We're sending almost all of the negative DC bias voltage up to the grids of our output tubes. So let's turn it on and see what our plate dissipation is with the pot at this setting. Okay, power's on. I'd already let the tubes heat up. And it looks like we're at around an average of about 23.5 and 375. Let's see what that plate dissipation is. Okay, 0.0235 times 375, and those electroharmonics tubes are hot little devils. Those are current flowing rascals, I'll tell you. They're a little over the maximum, so I'm going to go back in here and change the 18K resistor to a 20K resistor, and then we'll try it again. Okay, I've replaced the 18K with a 22K resistor. So now our full sweep of our bias control pot will be from 29.5 down to about 20.8. Now that brackets the schematic value and gives us a little extra resistance here to try to calm down these electroharmonics 6v6s. You're wondering perhaps why we had to go so high. I think it's the tubes themselves. I think the way they're made, some of them just happen to be able to flow current better than others. You know, as tubes age, they lose the ability to flow current because the coating on the cathode that generates the electrons for the plate current will diminish over time. So I personally am very impressed by these electroharmonics 6v6s, and I think in the future I will probably order that brand. You want the highest plate current you can get. In the beginning, the tubes will last a lot longer that way, okay, after you moderate it down to the proper plate dissipation. So let's go ahead and turn this on and see what happens. Okay, the power is on. Take a little while here for the tubes to warm. You know, the GZ34 pretty well eliminates any need for a standby switch. Now look at this. That's nice and low. Okay, let's crank up our plate current to what, about 20 at 3380. 20 at 380 would be 760. Let's go just a little bit higher. I grounded the tremolo oscillator loop so that we can get more stable readings. 21, that's around 7.8 or so. Let's go up just a tiny bit more. Let's go to this value. Let's check our plate dissipation with these readings. And that gives us a 7.7 on the left tube, 8.1 on the right, which I think is perfectly acceptable. It's a little bit below the 8.4. That is the maximum. And pretty nice close agreement here, so the tubes are fairly well matched. So let's go with that setting on our bias pot, and now we'll start on the tremolo. Now let's slow down the tremolo. And to understand how we're going to do that, let's take a look at the oscillator loop circuit. The signal comes out of the plate through a 0.02 microfarad cap. Then there's a resistor to ground. Through a 0.01 microfarad cap with a resistor to ground. And then through a third cap, this is another 0.01 microfarad, and then back into the grid. So you see, it's like the dog chasing its tail. We're going to have oscillation occur in a circular fashion through these three capacitors. And here they are. On a lot of Fender circuits, they're 3 disc capacitors. In this case, they're blue molded caps. Okay, now the way we're going to slow it down is to increase the capacitance of one of these two 0.01 microfarad caps. By increasing the capacitance, you slow down its ability to charge and discharge, and therefore you slow down the oscillation loop. Okay, it's what we call the time constant on the capacitor. So we're going to increase its capacitance and its time constant, and therefore slow down the oscillation. So let's let's start here with the middle one. We'll jumper with another 0.01 across it to turn it into a 0.02 microfarad cap. Okay, why don't I replace it? Well, if I jumper it, then the original one is still in place. If somebody down the line wants to go back to original, they can just unsolder two little joints and they have their original lineup. Before we just go in here and start soldering, I'm going to experiment a little bit to be sure that the 0.01 will work and that this is the best capacitor to add it to. So I put on two jumpers, and I've come down here to a 0.01 microfarad cap, and we're going to test the tremolo, see if the speed is what we like. If it all sounds fine, then I'll solder this in place. If it doesn't, we'll try it here in the first position, and if that doesn't sound slow enough, then we might try to up both of them with 0.01 microfarad parallel caps. So let's see what this modification has done for us. Okay, let's crank up our tone where we can hear it real well, and let's go over to our intensity, and that's the lowest speed, probably half as fast as it was. It speeds up more gradually. You know, that sounded pretty good, but us trim hounds like our tremolo slow and slimy, okay? We almost need to take a bath after you listen to it. So we've already jumpered this one with a 0.01, making it 0.02. Let's try jumpering this one with a 0.005, okay? And see if we can't slow it down just a little bit more to the level that the hounds will approve of. Now we're jumping with a 0.01 and a 0.005. Let's turn up our volume, intensity. Sounds pretty good slow. Sounds great high. I think that's ideal. Okay, so I'm going to hardwire in the 0.005 and 0.01 microfarad caps in parallel with the two 0.01s that are already in the circuit. And there are the two capacitors in parallel as previously discussed. Now that we've got the amp biased, tremolo under control, the bias power supply rebuilt, the 3-wire power cable installed properly with a negative feedback on-off switch, and capacitors and resistors tested, I think it's time for an audio check on this rascal. What do you think? So let's button it up and get Ollie and Jack all tuned up and see how it sounds. Well, I guess that's about it for this video extravaganza, which featured a 1963 Brownface Fender Deluxe Amp. I hope you enjoyed it and that you will stay tuned for our part 2 video, which will follow right after these all-important messages, in which I thank all my Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for keeping us on the air and advertising free. If you would like to join them in supporting our channel, please see the links in the video description. And now, it's part 2. To get where we're going, we have to cross the silvery Rio Grande, and this is it. Okay, because we're irrigating right now, the river is running actually pretty well. This is about as full as you're ever going to see the river. I apologize for the wind noise. I'm going to go to the other side where you'll see that a whole bunch of reeds have grown out here in the middle of the river, and that's where my parents found me years ago. A little boat. I was in there, just a little infant wrapped in swaddling clothes, and they found me in those reeds. Okay, we're on a fairly busy street here, but pretty soon we'll be out in the wilderness. Here is Mount Cristo Rey. From this angle you can't see the statue that's up on top, but soon enough we will. Now the road where we turn in to Mount Cristo Rey is up here ahead and not well marked. You'd go right by it if you didn't know what you were looking for. But here we're coming up to it, the green sign. We're going to turn right just beyond it. Like I said, this looks like somebody's driveway. Really rough dirt road. Okay, here's our first glimpse of the statue on top of Mount Cristo Rey, and as you can see, it's at quite a distance. We have train tracks here, and you're going to see another set of these tracks that very unusual up ahead. Okay, so let's continue. Originally this was a mining area, and as you'll see, there's still some of the mining equipment left here on the rocks. Here's another long distance shot of that mining equipment. It may have been to load trucks, something of that sort. Sure hadn't been used in a while. Here's a better shot of that statue that's up on top of the mountain. There's a, I don't know, like a 2-mile walk to get up there, which I will not be experiencing today at about 96 degrees. But anyway, where we're going is actually a very interesting area geologically and scenically. So let's continue. Okay, here are the train tracks that are going to run through that deep ravine way up ahead. And we're going to be up on the, if my finger doesn't blur too much, up here, the giant finger, up here on that edge up there in just a few minutes. Hopefully a train will come by. Of course it won't till the second we leave. Now this is our road, and we're going to make a really sharp turn, get real cozy here with the railroad tracks, and then we're going to go across, okay, to that road you see up above. Well, as luck would have it, the wind is really strong here, so there's going to be interference with the recording. I hope you can hear it. There's a chalk deposit way up here on the mountain, and what to me is far more interesting is this grotto that's been built in the side of the hill. Let's go over there and take a close-up look. There's a really steep, washed-out gully here, and then that grotto is just carved into the rock in the side of the hill. You see where there's brick all around the top. Looks like a pizza oven, but it's not. What it is a place where the Mexican people would put statues, probably, you know, the Virgin Mary and things like that, of great religious significance. Now it's empty. There was a brick wall at the rear, and I don't know, I hope you can see it okay back there, but it's been largely removed. But anyway, I found that really interesting. I imagine there were statues in there, and either vandals stole them or somebody removed them to prevent them from having any suffering any harm. It's quite a rock face here that this is dug into. This is an area that's heavily trafficked by illegal immigrants to the country. The Border Patrol's all over the place here. This is one of the favorite, we'll actually go in and see some of the favorite places where they come through and discuss it. Okay, let's continue on our voyage. Now we're on the extreme eastern side of the mountain. You can see the statue with the cross. We're much closer to it now. You see how rugged this is here. Now the road we've come in on is not exactly an interstate, but I'm going to show you something real interesting over here. It looks like there's a berm and then there's a mountain on the other side, and that's true, but wait till you see what's between the two. Okay, I'm going to walk up onto a kind of a low spot here in the berm, and as you can see, way down in there, probably 3 or 4, maybe, yeah, 4 stories down, are railroad tracks through this deep ravine. Now, the rocks here are loaded with fossils. This area was underwater. This was probably part of a coral reef. But what I'll do is go around and pick up just some random rocks and show you just how heavily fossiled, and I'm not taking that personally, these rocks are. You can also see our protectors, the Border Patrol, probably wondering what the heck I'm up to, because I certainly look suspicious. Hopefully I won't have a bout of vertigo and roll down onto the tracks. If I do, I hope the camera ends up aimed at me, okay? Might as well make a good farewell video. Those of you familiar with geology at all recognize a composite sedimentary rock here It's a bunch of pointy, sharp pebbles that have all been compressed into a rock form. Okay, and there's tons of this stuff here. How about that for a strange one? Almost looks man-made, but it's not. And here we have a rare deposit of aluminum. I guess ancient rubber trees grew here at some time in the past also. Here we have a very rare iron deposit. Some unusual like limestone pearls here on this rock. Here we have a rare piece of curb rock. Speaking of fossils, how about that? Looks sort of like a snail shell, okay? But that snail is probably older than I am. In fact, if we look in here closer, there's all sorts of other snail shells buried in this rock. Look at this layering here. These look like they've just been scattered here like poker chips, but they're solid. Here's a whole bunch of layered rocks that have sort of patterns on the surface all around in this same area, probably all part of one larger rock that was broken apart. I was over here in the bushes heeding nature's call when I found a rare rebar snake. Okay, see it? It looks so much like rebar that people just pass it by, okay, and just drop it like that. But then when you turn your back and walk away, it comes back to life and slithers away. See? I turned my back and he's gone. I also found some ancient Indian writing here. It looks like Big Bertha was here, or maybe Rita was here. But I thought it was strange that they wrote sort of like we do, okay? Isn't that mysterious? Okay, I'm walking down the road probably that the Border Patrol uses. We're going to come to a sandy wash up ahead. It sounds like a cowboy movie star from the 40s. And we'll check it. And here it is. It's my understanding they used to rake this smooth, and at night they'd come and see if there were any footprints, and they'd know that people had passed by. Now it's covered with tire tracks. Once again, probably the Border Patrol. You can see way down there at the end of the canyon. Okay, here's a rock that's just loaded with seashells. It might look like little smooth pebbles, but it's not. Okay, just a mass of smooth-shelled seashells. Try saying that 10 times fast. Another one over here. Well, here's a butte, and it's a fairly small rock. I'm tempted to take it with me. All kinds of the fan-type seashells all over this thing. Because, as I said, this was a tropical sea reef at one time, although it'd be hard to tell it without looking at it now. You know, some of these fossils look really familiar. In fact, I think I went to high school with that one. Well, I guess that's about it. Getting kind of hot out here in the direct sun. I think we'll say our farewells to Mount Cristo Rey and the statue atop it and the interesting geology and scenery that it provides. Thanks for joining me on this trip. If you like this, we can do more. There's all sorts of neat areas around where I live, and I'll be glad to take you there. Okay, let me know what you think.